FNCS qualifiers are officially over and we now know exactly who's going through the semifinals and whose FNCS is over. Did Mongrel and Savage move to NA for nothing? Did Cypher PK end up pulling it off in his first FNCS in forever? I also want to talk about how the new changes to Nitro affecting competitive. Do I think it's better for the game? What is going on with Nitro Fist? And I want to talk about the new Reload game mode and why it is currently saving this season of Fortnite. There's a lot to talk about. Let's jump into it. Before I get into talking about FNCS and competitive, I want to kick off with the good vibes of talking about the new game mode Reload, which is extremely popular right now. It has over 1 million player peak between builds and no builds in its first day of being launched. This game mode is extremely successful. A lot of people saying it has saved the season. Now, again, of course, when you do anything OG Fortnite, it's going to get a bunch of attention, but it seems like the player base is still holding strong. The fact that it has builds and no builds being accessible to everyone, I think was a great addition. A lot of people saying there are some changes they'd love to see made. Obviously, they want Siphon being added. People hoping, they adapt this with different loopholes and different POIs to keep it fresh, like season-on-season content. But for the most part, people are saying it's really fun. The main complaint I am seeing is no squads, but leakers have identified they've put a duos version into the game file. But unfortunately, I have to be the bearer of bad news. I was talking to Osirian, and to make this run, there has to be a downloadable game update for them to turn this on. The next downloadable game update is basically about a month away. So it looks like they are going to add a duos version to the game mode, but you won't get it for at least a month. Now, the other complaint I'm getting is apparently the skill-based matchmaking is insane. The first few games are nice and casual and fun. You kind of roll on people, getting a few wins, and then you get absolutely dominated by just sweat after sweat, pro players, everyone going crazy. And I've been watching a lot of streamers play this, and it does feel a little bit like that. I don't know if it's because obviously a lot of the better players of the game don't want to verse the cars and all the goofiness in the regular game mode right now, so they're all queuing up into this game mode. But I am watching a lot of people really struggle against far better players, which again, if you can respawn, it's not so bad. But one of the strengths of this game mode is if you're in a friend group where there's one or two of you who's way better at the game, and you got a few friends who are really casual, and every time you play they just end up dying and spectating, they get bored. The idea is now they can jump back in and reboot whenever they want, which is still really fun, but it is going to be a lot harder if you're versing booger after booger in this game mode. So I'm not sure whether that's been your experience as well, but outside of those two factors, having to play squads and the lobbies being really hard, it seems to be received overall really well, and I'm really hoping we get some in-game tournaments on this game mode. It's looking like it's not an LTM, it's not just in here for a little while. It looks like they've brought this back as a permanent game mode, and it's going to stay. Before we get into looking at the leaderboard, I actually want to talk about how FNCS played out with the new meta changes. Obviously, most notably, the Nitro being heavily nerfed. Instead of doing 300 structure damage, it now does 90. And is it better for the game? Yes, I feel like most people are going to agree with this. The only negativity I've really seen towards this change was the fact that it didn't happen sooner. A lot of people upset they had to play FNCS with the broken Nitro, and then right after opens, that's when they nerfed it. And I have to agree, it is a much more skillful, in my opinion, more fun to watch meta, and it seems like it's more fun to play as well. Once I go through the leaderboards, especially on NA, you're going to realize that a lot of the top teams are coming out on top now who are maybe struggling a bit because people were just Nitro sprinting through their box and there wasn't too much you could do about it. I still would argue that if the Fist got nerfed a little bit more and whatever bug is still with them got fixed and came back into the game, I think that would be a more fun competitive meta. I think it would just be a little bit more exciting. We had a very low mobility meta last season with people only really using the wings in grand finals, but for the most part, the only mobility was the dashing or the grim medallion. And then this season now, it's not no mobility. Obviously, the Nitro is still really strong. You can take no full damage, you sprint way faster, and you can sprint infinitely as long as the Nitro effect is on you. So it's definitely mobility, but it's nothing compared to like launch pads or bounce pads or like katanas or anything like that. So I would have liked the high mobility meta, but for the most part, it's looking really fun. I think semis and grands are going to be super stacked, and the fights you now see and people going for refreshes are way more skillful now that it's been nerfed. But to answer your question, a lot of people keep saying this, Aussie, do you think the gloves are coming back? They still have time to put the Fist back in competitive. I don't know. They've kept them out for a really long time now, and they've only kept them out of competitive. So whatever bug that was affecting them with ranked and pubs where people could just sit in the sky infinitely doesn't seem to be happening that much. So I think they're directly choosing not to put them back in competitive. And even if they wanted to put them in competitive, I talked to Osirian and they let me know that the only way they can put them back is with a downloadable game update, which is going to take another month until the next update. So even if they wanted them back in the game, they can't be. So we're going at least until after semifinals with no gloves. So do I think they throw them back in just for grand finals? Most likely not. I mean, we've seen Fortnite do crazier things, but I don't think we'll see the gloves come back, at least during FNCS, maybe for the last couple of cash cups, but again, I still doubt it. Now, let's talk FNCS. This was the final qualifying week. How did the finals shake up, and who is out of FNCS entirely? So, kicking off with the NA finals, we had a team that has been so far a little bit quiet this season based on how insane their last season was. Peterbot and Poyo coming in first on NA on 295 points, playing all six matches, winning one of them, but having a very, very good match history outside of this. 2 Elim 5th, 8 Elim 9th, 5 Elim 15th, 8 Elim win, 6 Elim 9th, and then a 5 Elim 12th. Now, compared to last season, that's not an insane performance, but this lobby was extremely stacked. If the NA lobby looks like this for grand finals, I will be very, very happy with a few extra teams. We were missing some big names like Mr. Savage and Mongrel. I'll talk about why they weren't playing and what's happening with their FNCS in a little bit, but this lobby was really, really hard, and Peterbot and Poyo showed up big. So already a team that I wouldn't say was struggling with the old Nitro, but they weren't winning tournaments, they weren't doing as well, has now stepped up massively in the first tournament since it's been nerfed. Another team that I think stepped up potentially even more massively than Peterbot and Poyo is Ritual and Reed. They were only 5 points behind Peterbot and Poyo, but in their last game, Reed's internet actually went out and he had to leave the tournaments. That massively hurt them when they probably were going to win the tournament. If you look at their match history, 12 Elim 3rd, 8 Elim 5th, 7 Elim 3rd, 12 Elim 2nd, and then the last 2 games, unfortunately, were their stinker games. But outside of that, they played phenomenally, and they're looking very, very dominant in this new meta. Then we had Batman, Booger, and Rapid in 3rd. This is a team that has now won 2 of the 3 Duo Cash Cups, won a whole bunch of rounds of FNCS. This is Batman, Booger, and Rapid season. You're probably wondering, Aussie, why didn't they win the tournament then? They are currently getting contested by Bucky and Okus, and they did really well, winning 5 of the games on spawn, but it was in game number 6 they went down on spawn, and it was that game that really, really hurt them. And if they won that game on spawn, there's a good chance they would have gone on to win FNCS week 2. They are playing extremely well right now. You're probably wondering where they've come from. Batman, Boog, and Rapid shouldn't be new names to you. They did end up placing top 15 in the last LAN, which I think a lot of people keep forgetting about. They've had a pretty quiet chapter, but they're both very high ping players for the most part for how good they play. Batman Boog usually plays on about 50 ping, Rapid plays on about 70 out of Canada. Both these players have moved to hard 0 ping. They are playing in Dallas this month, and it is clearly showing with some phenomenal placements. Next up, we have the Dig duo, who have been quiet so far this season. Kanata was doing really well alongside Skittles while Cooper was on break, but again, I will say before you start flaming Cooper, or they were playing better with Skittles, they had the infinite mythic crossbow, which is obviously a huge buff that now Kanata and Cooper aren't playing with outside of Nitrodrome. So they came in 4th place on 231 points, a very good performance. They did start the tournament a little bit slow. Kanata ended up hitting the VOD saying the Surge was just a nightmare in their part of the map. There's so many good teams around them, because all of the LAN qualified and obviously FNCS winning teams around them. They ended up hitting the VODs, pulled it back, and their second half of the tournament was much, much better than the first, which is a good sign for this team coming into semis and grand finals. Then we had our week 1 winners, Clicks and Veno. Now, 5th place, again, is still a really good performance, but there is a lot of expectations on this team right now to win everything. They kicked off the tournament with a 2 Elim 2nd, and I think so far that was probably the biggest issue with this team. They just didn't get that many kills. I mean, Veno and Clicks were doing crazy damage. Their early Storm Surge is amazing. A few times they went for aggressive high ground takes and they played really well, but they just had a whole bunch of teams going for high ground. I don't know what it was about NA finals today, but high ground was the place to be and everyone was going for it. So despite Clicks and Veno playing for their high takes really, really well, they just didn't hold it down well enough to get the placements to get a top 3 finish, but still a really good 5th. We finally got a chance to see how Muzz and Trashy would do out of Pleasant Piazza Uncon, as they've been conned this entire season so far. They did really well, coming in 6th place overall. Then we had Visuals and Braids in 7th, Dukes and Sphinx in 8th, Bryson Bolts in 9th, and then Playify and Higher in 10th. There is only less than 100 points between 1st and 10th on this leaderboard. This finals was extremely stacked. We had Ages and Rise in 12th, we had Tate and Yomzo, one of the favorites, in 17th, Aviv and Booga in 16th, Pink and Mero in 19th. We had all of the big names in here, and again, if you watch the tournament or you talk to any of the pros, you might be confused why there was this kind of vibe of it's just practice. Again, a lot of these teams in this current format, I explained this recently, because they've already made semifinals by even making this round, it kind of just becomes broadcasted scrims. They are playing for who gets upper bracket versus lower bracket, bracket. And again, that's what's really important for some of these big teams, which I'll talk about in a second. But for the most part, most of these teams after week 1 were already in upper bracket, and they weren't really playing for anything in week 2. For example, like Clicks and Venos. So I do want to say that this tournament was extremely stacked. It was really fun to watch, but I don't think I would take this as 100%, oh, these teams did well in week 2, they're going to do well in grands. There were a few teams trying out some strategies, or more commonly, there was a lot of teams actually hiding their strategies, not revealing them before grand. So we had some big names, but I do think it'll look a little bit different come grand finals. EU's leaderboard looking a bit similar to how it has throughout this season. There's a lot of new underrated players coming up and filling the spots of those big pros who've left to go play on NA or other regions. And again, first place, a team you probably haven't heard too much about, Starkus and iFrozzy. I think iFrozzy or iFrozzy. Again, very, very underrated team that I could not tell you much about, but they've managed to step up, and the big names were still playing. Vidil and Rezon in 4th, Pablo and Bevies in 5th, Swizzy and Vanyak in 6th, Snazy Podesai in 7th. We had those big names, but these players are still coming out on top. I will point out though, the leaderboard on EU was insanely low scoring for the most part. First place 217, 10th place 156. There was only one team that got a victory royale inside the top 10 in a 6-game tournament. So EU right now, with a lot of these big teams missing, do have those underrated players, but also means the points are being spread out really far as no one is just stepping up and absolutely dominating. Starkus only beating out Cringe and Volko, a brand new team, in 2nd by 214, and Gunbra's team in 3rd on 210. It's a very, very close leaderboard over on EU, and I know a lot of people are saying there's no one on EU anymore, it's so boring, it's so uncompetitive now. That is not true. It is still extremely fun to watch because the players are still amazing. There's just a lot of names you and myself haven't heard about, but I think that's what's going to be so fun coming into semis and grands and seeing where these players go and giving them a chance to really kind of make a name for themselves with a lot of those big players out of the picture. I'm really hoping Epic do change up the FNCS format going forward. I'd love for it to be a little bit different next year, so there is something for players to play for, like Clicks and Veno, who did well week 1. They could have just skipped week 2 and they're in the exact same situation. That is a bit of a strange format, so we either need money in the weekly finals to have something to play for, or I think what would be more exciting is just another way of changing up how the seeding works to give more of an advantage to playing properly the whole way through. I do like the semi-finals format. I think for the most part it is quite exciting, although it is a little bit confusing for some of you guys who maybe don't follow competitive as closely, but it's more the weekly qualifiers that need to be a little bit readjusted going forward. Now, speaking of FNCS, a lot of people are asking me this, well, Aussie, when is the next FNCS? And unfortunately, the answer is we don't know. We don't actually know when the next FNCS is. We have the LAN next season, which is going to be in September. That's going to take place in the Stark season. Normally, we haven't actually had FNCSs during the LAN season, so there probably won't be one next season. And the season after that is the OG season. We're going back to Chapter 2. So a lot of people are hoping we're going to get an OG FNCS. It was in the game files a little while ago, so I'm really, really hoping we get some kind of solo FNCS during OG, which doesn't call you to the LAN, but it is for money and it is for a little bit of hype, which would be exciting. The last thing I do want to say is if I haven't covered a team that you care about, you want to know whether they made upper bracket, lower bracket, are they in semifinals, as always, kinchanalytics.com/FNCS. I'll put in the description down below. You can go there, check any region you want, search your player's name, and it will tell you exactly where they are, whether they're in upper, lower bracket, or out of FNCS. Now, that is not the official leaderboard. It could change if someone gets banned or something goes wrong, but up until as far as we know right now, that is the updated leaderboard, and that's how you know who's still in FNCS.